been besmirched. Sweet Ella May's been courted, but the darling ain't been churched.
Now gather round, young'uns, because I got a few things to say to you.
Cool it, cats. Granny's gonna lay a few words on us. Go, Granny.
Picture this, a television show so aggressively simple, so deliberately unsophisticated, that the people who greenlit it were embarrassed to admit they'd done so. Critics sharpened their pens before the first episode even aired. Network executives quietly distanced themselves from the project. Intellectuals from New York to Los Angeles declared it an insult to the medium. And then 60 million Americans sat down on a Wednesday night in September 1962 and proved every single one of them catastrophically wrong. The Beverly Hillbillies did not just succeed. It detonated. Within weeks of its premiere, it became the fastest rising show in American television history, shattering viewership records that had stood for years and commanding advertising rates that made competing networks physically ill with envy. For 9 consecutive seasons, the Clampett family ruled primetime television with a banjo, a rocking chair, and a swimming pool they insisted on calling a cement pond. But behind that deceptively rustic facade, nothing about this show was simple. The man who created it was nursing a decades-long grudge. The woman who stole every scene had been performing since before most of her castmates were born. The actor who played the lovable fool secretly resented every laugh the audience gave him. And the network that profited most from the show's extraordinary success eventually stabbed it in the back without a moment's hesitation. These are 20 secrets about the Beverly Hillbillies that stayed buried for decades, and some of them will permanently change how you think about one of America's most beloved television programs. Paul Henning did not create the Beverly Hillbillies because he had a charming idea for a comedy. He created it because he was furious. For years, New York entertainment journalists and television critics had dismissed rural comedy as lowbrow garbage, beneath the dignity of serious television. They celebrated urban sophistication and sneered openly at anything involving farmers, small towns, or country sensibilities. Henning, who had grown up in Missouri and carried his working-class roots with him into the gilded corridors of Hollywood, took that contempt personally. His response was surgical. He deliberately constructed the most aggressively rural premise he could imagine, a poor mountain family striking oil and relocating to the wealthiest neighborhood in America, then sat back and waited to see whether regular people agreed with the critics. They did not. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered, critics savaged it exactly as expected, and audiences ignored the critics completely. The show became #1 almost immediately, and Paul Henning reportedly kept every negative review in a scrapbook, reading them periodically with considerable satisfaction. By the time Buddy Ebsen read Paul Henning's script for the Beverly Hillbillies, he was 54 years old and carrying invisible wounds from one of Hollywood's most disturbing industrial accidents. 2 decades earlier, he had been cast as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, a dream role that nearly destroyed him. The aluminum powder used in his makeup coated his lungs during filming, causing severe respiratory failure that hospitalized him for weeks and forced him to surrender the role to Jack Haley entirely. The experience had made Ebsen cautious about studios and deeply skeptical of productions that treated performers as expendable props. When Henning approached him about playing Jed Clampett, Ebsen read the material carefully and found something that surprised him, a lead character written with genuine dignity. Jed was not a punchline. He was wise, morally grounded, and consistently the most sensible person in every room he entered. Ebsen accepted the role and brought to it a quiet warmth that anchored the entire series, transforming what could have been simple slapstick into something audiences genuinely cared about. Audiences watching Granny Clampett terrorize Beverly Hills society had absolutely no idea they were watching one of the most technically accomplished performers in American entertainment history. Irene Ryan had been working since childhood, cutting her teeth in vaudeville during an era when live performance demanded absolute mastery of timing, physicality, and audience reading. By the time she auditioned for the Beverly Hillbillies, she had accumulated decades of stage, radio, film, and early television experience, and had never once been given a starring role. She had always been the reliable supporting player, the consummate professional who elevated everyone around her while remaining invisible herself. Paul Henning recognized immediately what he was looking at during her audition. Ryan brought ferocious commitment to Granny, performing her own physical stunts and delivering comic timing so precise it appeared effortless. What audiences found particularly delightful, had they known it, was that Ryan was actually younger than Buddy Ebsen, who played her son-in-law. The frail, elderly mountain woman they saw on screen was constructed entirely from makeup, costume, and extraordinary theatrical skill. Donna Douglas was in the middle of building a serious dramatic acting career when her agent sent her the Beverly Hillbillies script, and her initial reaction was close to offense. Playing a sweet-natured blonde who talked to animals and struggled with basic arithmetic felt like a regression, a return to the decorative roles she had been deliberately escaping. She showed up to the audition skeptical and prepared to be disappointed. Instead, she discovered that Paul Henning had written Ellie Mae Clampett with surprising layers. Beneath the comedic surface was a character of genuine kindness and unexpected inner strength. Douglas accepted the role provisionally, planning to use the network exposure as a launching pad toward the dramatic work she actually wanted. Then the show exploded into a cultural phenomenon. Her face appeared on magazine covers and merchandise across the country, and casting directors everywhere decided she was Ellie Mae and nothing else. The role that had seemed like a temporary compromise became a permanent ceiling, and Douglas spent years navigating the complex relationship between the fame it gave her and the career it quietly closed off. Max Baer Jr. came from athletic royalty. His father had been heavyweight boxing champion of the world, and the younger Baer had grown up determined to carve his own identity through acting. He was intelligent, genuinely educated, and possessed natural screen charisma. Then he was cast as Jethro Bodine, and the identity he had worked to establish began dissolving into the character. Jethro was the show's designated fool, a character whose spectacular dimness generated enormous amounts of comedy. Baer played the role with complete commitment and considerable technical skill, but off-screen the experience gnawed at him. People began treating him like Jethro in real life, speaking to him slowly, making assumptions about his intelligence that infuriated a man who was, by most accounts, sharper than most of the people laughing at him. He attempted repeatedly to demonstrate his range behind the camera, directing episodes and developing scripts, but the industry had already made its judgment. The Jethro problem would shadow Baer for the rest of his professional life. The sprawling estate where the Clampetts lived was not a studio construction. It was Chartwell Manor, a genuine 10-acre Beverly Hills property built in 1933 and consistently ranked among the most valuable real estate in Los Angeles. The production company rented it for exterior filming, capturing the arriving truck, the poolside scenes, and the driveway interactions that established the show's essential visual contrast. Interior scenes were constructed on sound stages, but that real exterior anchored everything in authentic opulence. The arrangement required considerable diplomatic management. The estate's owners were understandably possessive about their property and demanded that filming cause minimal disruption. Production crews learned to work with unusual speed, completing their shots efficiently and clearing out before overstaying their welcome. The mansion later changed hands multiple times, eventually being purchased by a prominent financier for a figure well into the tens of millions. It remains one of Los Angeles's most recognized private properties, forever associated in the public imagination with a hillbilly family that lived there only on camera. The Beverly Hillbillies generated extraordinary wealth for CBS. At its peak it commanded television's highest advertising rates, its reruns sold to local stations for record sums, and merchandise bearing the Clampett name flooded stores nationwide. The network was, by any reasonable measure, swimming in money generated almost entirely by the talent and chemistry of four principal performers. Those performers had signed their contracts before anyone suspected the show might become a phenomenon, locking themselves into salaries that looked reasonable in 1962 and embarrassing in retrospect. Buddy Ebsen earned the most, but even his compensation was a fraction of what the role genuinely warranted. Donna Douglas and Max Baer Jr. earned considerably less. Irene Ryan, despite being essential to virtually every memorable moment the show produced, was paid the least among the principal cast. None of them held any ownership interest or profit participation. When the show ended, they walked away with their weekly salaries and nothing else, while CBS continued collecting millions from the show for decades afterward. The ballad that opened each episode of the Beverly Hillbillies, explaining Jed's oil discovery and the subsequent relocation to California, became one of the most recognizable pieces of music in American television history. Network executives wanted it gone before the show aired. They considered it too country, too cluttered with narrative information, too aggressively rural for a program they were nervously hoping might appeal to mainstream audiences. Paul Henning fought back with characteristic stubbornness, arguing that the song performed essential storytelling work by establishing the premise clearly for viewers encountering the show for the first time. CBS reluctantly agreed to test it with the pilot, reserving the right to replace it. Audience response ended that conversation permanently. Viewers loved the song immediately, learned the lyrics quickly, and began treating it as an interactive experience. The theme was written and performed by Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, genuine bluegrass legends whose involvement gave the music a credibility and authenticity that a more commercially calculated composition would have lacked entirely. Raymond Bailey's portrayal of Milburn Drysdale, the desperately obsequious banker obsessed with retaining the Clampett fortune, was not caricature. Paul Henning had conducted genuine research into how private banking institutions treated wealthy clients, particularly those who lacked financial sophistication, and discovered practices that ranged from quietly manipulative to overtly exploitative. Wealthy depositors were routinely cultivated, flattered, and gradually surrounded by financial arrangements designed primarily to benefit the institution managing their money. Drysdale was that reality compressed into comedy. Bailey brought remarkable authenticity to the role because he arrived with relevant personal history, having worked in business before transitioning to acting and understanding from direct experience how institutional ambition could systematically corrupt individual behavior. The character worked as comedy precisely because the underlying critique was genuine. Audiences laughed at Drysdale's groveling desperation while absorbing, perhaps without fully registering it, a fairly scathing portrait of how financial institutions actually operate. Nancy Culp, who played the perpetually overlooked Miss Jane Hathaway with brilliant understated timing, and Buddy Ebsen developed a genuine friendship across 9 seasons of working together. They shared meals, discussed scripts, and navigated Hollywood's considerable chaos side by side. It was, by all accounts, a warm and mutually sustaining relationship. In 1984, Culp ran for Congress in Pennsylvania as a Democrat, campaigning on progressive platform positions. Ebsen, a committed conservative Republican, responded not simply by disagreeing but by recording a radio advertisement for her opponent, his voice telling Pennsylvania voters that Nancy Culp held positions too extreme for the state. The advertisement shocked the entertainment community. Culp lost the election and never spoke to Ebsen again. She later described his intervention as the most painful betrayal she had experienced in her life, more wounding than the Electo.